Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, Kieran O'Connor. From July 21st to July 24th, thousands of Americans will gather near Mount Rushmore in South Dakota for a 3-day conference called Freedom Fest. Freedom Fest, according to its website, is an annual festival where free minds meet to celebrate great books, great ideas, and great thinkers in an open-minded environment. The festival is billed as nonpartisan, and it's a movement dedicated to liberty. It's deeply popular with libertarians, and speakers this year include Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, Dave Rubin, Larry Elder, John McWhorter, and many others who are generally considered conservative or heterodox thinkers. Braver Angels will be sending a contingent of volunteers and manning a booth at Freedom Fest to spread the word about our work and encourage festival goers to check out Braver Angels and hopefully participate in an event. We're dedicated to maintaining and building and sustaining ideological diversity at Braver Angels, from Black Lives Matter to the Tea Party, socialists, hardcore members of the Tea Party. We welcome everyone. And we're especially keen on attracting free thinkers across the spectrum. And I'm sure we'll find plenty of new Braver Angels that week. So my guest today is Valerie Durham. She is the executive director of Freedom Fest. I wanted to have Valerie on to talk more about the festival and also have a wider conversation about the political landscape, the potential intersection between classical liberalism, viewpoint diversity, and depolarization, and what role libertarians might have in bringing us together. So, Valerie, welcome to the Braver Angels podcast.
Thanks so much, Kieran. I'm excited to be here and talk about Freedom Fest, but also to talk about your mission, which I feel is greatly aligned with the approach that Freedom Fest takes, which is kind of, in this day and age, a little bit bold. and
brave, you might say.
Yeah, we quite brave, yes, and angelic. Well,
exactly.
You got to have a little bit of that loftier, higher sensibility, because it's so easy to get pulled into the fray. But I've been the executive director of Freedom Fest since fall of 2014. 2015 was my first conference that I directed, and it was interesting because I come from a dance background. So my experience was in putting together dance conferences or dance performances, really. And a lot of those same elements were there, but all of a sudden I'm dealing with senators and presidential candidates and major, boxers. We had George Foreman that year, and then Donald Trump showed up. And so talk about diversity of opinion on our stage. So it's been an interesting experience as we have dealt with a lot of different viewpoints, and that's really the goal. We try not to use political labels at Freedom Fest because we want to get into the debate. And we find as soon as you slap a label on somebody, then that's what they are, and they're pigeonholed in that box. And if you align with them, you listen, and if you don't align with them, you tune out. So we talk about the topics that are important and impact our world today, and we get a nice wide set of viewpoints from experts, and then we let people decide, which I think is really what democracy and society should be all about: the individual interacting with others and making voluntary decisions about what they think.
Totally. Well, you mentioned a little bit about your background coming out of the dance world. Mm-hmm. What made you want to lead the festival? How did that happen?
Yeah.
And what attracts you to this kind of work?
Well, thank you. That is a fun question for me because it's multifaceted why I ended up in this role. Some quite practical and some quite philosophical and even metaphysical. So I am still a dancer. I have trained since the age of 3, and I discovered the work of a woman named Isadora Duncan, who came from California, went over, this was more than 100 years ago, was known as the mother of modern dance. She was rebellious sort, and went over to Europe and kind of took Europe by storm and developed this new approach to artistic theatrical dance that was very different from ballet. And so I was really attracted to her approach to dance, which was highly individualistic. It wasn't the idea you're going to be in the corps de ballet and look like everyone else. She said, when Valerie Durham dances, it's going to look very different than when Kieran dances or when, she dances or whatever. And I loved that diversity. So that was already in the mix. I've also always been part of the liberty concept and idea. My family is very steeped in that. My great uncle wrote The Naked Communist, The Naked Capitalist. He wrote The Making of America. He started a foundation for the study of the Constitution. My father has been part of the effort to legalize gold back in the 70s and has been an Austrian economist and a free market economist and written many, many books. And I've kind of been in the liberty world to some degree or another. Grew up in Washington, D.C., traveled around the world after that. So in 2014, I had come out of graduate school. I went to graduate school for dance, which also had an influence on me in terms of my sense that we need to be less partisan politically. So I had just had this experience for 3 years, amazing, intensive, artistic work that was also very challenging on an intellectual level because I was being exposed to a lot of new ideas that in the postmodern sense of things that I hadn't had before. And I was surrounded by people who I think would not identify themselves as being part of a liberty movement. However, we shared a lot of values on the social level, many different aspects we actually agreed. And there were many things where we did not agree. And it made me realize that these were my colleagues and I knew them to be intelligent, compassionate, hardworking, insightful, wise individuals. And if they were concerned about something or felt like a particular issue needed to be addressed, that there must be something to that. And that needs to be respected. And I did respect that. So that was probably early on. I started understanding about different cultural perspectives, even though I had lived around the world and traveled so much. In a much deeper theoretical way, I started to understand this concept. But I took it like, I think our solution needs to be different. So I understood the concern and I shared the concern. I came to really understand the concern, but I thought, I think there are other ways to solve this problem. So I started seeing the value of different approaches. Do we need government to solve the problem? Maybe not, but that doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. And sometimes that's what I see as the challenge, is that if the other side has a problem with something, then you deny it even exists instead of saying, okay, let's take this on and let's find the best way to solve it. So I just had this experience. I go into the world, I'm going to start a dance school, everything's going to be fantastic. And of course, it's very challenging to make I really honor people who can make a full living doing dance. So this opportunity came along and I took it because I could still keep doing my dance and have I feel like I'm mirrored. So my right side of the brain could be stimulated and my left side of the brain could now also have the stimulation. On a practical side, it is a family business. My parents started Freedom Fest back in 2002 when it was FEE Fest with the Foundation for Economic Education, and my dad was president of FEE. And he saw this need where you had all these great think tanks and organizations doing wonderful work, but it didn't seem like people were talking to each other. And so he wanted Freedom Fest to be this place where everyone could come together for 3 days, no matter what your perspective. If you had a stake around liberty in some way, we could come together and talk about it and find new ways to network, learn from each other, share with each other, and find collaborative projects. And I think that's really happened. So on a practical level, the old conference director decided to retire, and I got a phone call from my parents that said, we need to fill this position, and would you like to give it a try? And so I said, yes. And happily, since that time, I have found great personal fulfillment. It's not just a family business, and so I do it because it's, you know, Michael and Sons, and I'm the son. It's because I really am passionate about these issues, and I feel like Freedom Fest is an opportunity for me to have some impact in this way, towards greater political conversation and movement towards greater freedom for all of us and equality for all of us.
Cool. And so for folks who are going to the festival or people who are just curious about checking it out online, what can they expect, and what do you hope people will take away from the festival, just given where we are as a political culture and society in 2021?
Oh boy, that's a big question, Karen. But I'm up to the task. Okay, so first of all, go to www.freedomfest.com and check out all the information we have on the homepage, on the speaker page, on the exhibitor page. So for us, our exhibitors are not just some sort of extra thing down the hall. It is integral, because these are the groups and the businesses and the companies and the organizations doing the work. And so it's so important as part of your Freedom Fest experience to come into the exhibit hall, which John Mackey of Whole Foods calls the trade show for liberty. Come in and actually meet these organizations: Reason Foundation, Braver Angels, you know, the Art of Liberty Foundation, Freedom Works, Free the People, Libertarian Party. It's overwhelming. We have over 180 sponsors. It's our biggest hall ever, because I think the passion for this is so extreme. You also need to be prepared, in addition to our 180 sponsors, that we have over 260 speakers on a huge variety of topics. So this is not just a political conference, because freedom, liberty, equality, justice do not just apply. It's very important in our political world, but it also applies in economics, in finance, in our education system, in our healthcare system, in our criminal justice system. It applies in our social issues. We have sessions on sex work decriminalization. We have sessions on modern monetary theory. We have sessions on taxation. We have sessions on election validity and ranked choice voting. So like, we're getting into a lot of different areas: climate change and philosophy and technology and the future of longevity. Like, we talk about health. We talk about so many different things. So there truly is something for everybody. You do not need to be a policy wonk to come to Freedom Fest. If you like that, that exists. But you can also go to a session on jazz and talk about the free associative quality and spontaneous order of jazz, which is super, super fascinating. We have a full film festival that's dedicated to libertarian themes of choice, accountability, and individuality. That's running at the Elks Theater 2 blocks away in Rapid City. So 160 sessions, main stage speakers like J.P. Sears, Tom Woods, Dave Rubin, John McWhorter, as you mentioned, Governor Noem, Senator Loomis, Senator Mike Lee, Representative Davidson, Mark Meckler of Parler is going to come talk about that whole drama, not just from like an advocacy for Parler, but like, what are the broader issues involved in censorship and free speech? And are these big tech companies actually working as private companies if they're being coerced by the government to have these policies in place? It's a very fascinating conversation that I think a lot of us have a huge stake in how we go forward, in how we communicate and interact with each other, and social media is a huge part of that. And to shut down voice in that area is not a great thing, and we've experienced that at Freedom Fest. The last thing I'll say about Freedom Fest is that it's not only an opportunity to engage with all these organizations, hear from these great speakers, listen to and engage with, ask questions about, which we really encourage the audience to get involved in the conversation and share their knowledge, because we have incredibly intelligent attendees at Freedom Fest. We also have fun, and that's really important too. In this world that's so heavy and divided, we have parties and socials and dancing and music, live music and live painting events. And so we go hiking, we do yoga, we have so much fun, in addition to the important work of wrestling through these issues and trying to get to the truth.
So in terms of, maintaining ideological diversity and exploring disagreements and sort of exploring different conceptions of liberty and freedom and equality, I noticed there aren't too many speakers or organizations on the left. Is that sort of a function of the culture and tradition of the festival, or, did folks you reached out to on the left just not want to participate because they felt outnumbered? What's sort of the reality of that asymmetry?
It's a great question. I'm super excited Naomi Wolf is coming this year to talk about some interesting things that she has to share. So when I came on board, I would say we leaned more conservative, even though we called ourselves a libertarian event. And I've kind of brought us back more to that libertarian base, because there are other groups that kind of serve that conservative community. We love our libertarian-leaning conservatives. We also love our libertarian-leaning leftists, or left-leaning libertarians, or however you want to call it, which I hate using those terms. But there's so much that we can learn from that side. And they are highly underrepresented at Freedom Fest. And it's not from a lack of trying. I do think because of our history, we'll have people look and say, oh, you had so-and-so here, and no, they don't see that other side, and they think, oh, it's not for me. However, we've also had full-on conversations with people about this, like diversity of opinion and how important it is to get these different perspectives on the stage. And then in particular, it does feel like the conservatives are more willing to show up and say what they have to say. And people on the so-called left, and again, I don't like using that term, but it's a term that everyone understands, are often unwilling to come engage in that way. And it's a struggle for us. And it's an open call right now here on this podcast. If you are a left-leaning libertarian with a point of view that needs to be shared and countered, we definitely want you. Email us today. I don't know if we can get you in this year because but 2022 is coming up. It is a huge goal of ours to make sure there is more representation on that side. And it's been a struggle. We often get the no from that side of the political viewpoint because they're not willing to engage, or they want to not have that challenge. And I don't know what the answer is. I could be completely wrong about why they say no. But the desire is there coming from us. I don't know what we have to do, but we're going to figure it out. We'll figure out how to get more of that breadth on that side of the spectrum.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's something we've struggled with as well, but almost kind of flipped. So, we have the Braver Angels rule, which is, at every level of leadership or participation that we can control as leadership, we want it to be 50-50 red, blue. And obviously red and blue are somewhat amorphous terms that themselves encapsulate a whole, range of opinions. But at the same time, there is a polarization and polarity in our system right now. And we sort of are presupposing that in an effort to foster discussions across it.
And that's one of the big challenge is the sense of bipartisanship. It's tripartisanship or quadripartisanship. There's so many more perspectives out there that the libertarian view, the constitutionalist view, the socialist view, it's not just red and blue. And I think that has been intentional to a certain degree because it allows the power play with certain people who are in power. But there's so many more viewpoints there. There's the gold view and the green view and the,
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing out those differences and richness and complexities and nuance is something that sort of naturally happens when you bring people together in the right kind of structured environment where people can sort of get beyond, the culture war talking points that are just sort of inherently informed by stereotypes.
Right.
But at the same time, our membership, because we're a membership organization, leans blue. And it's sort of an interesting challenge because I see some overlap with what you were saying. I think that traditionally the, quote unquote dialogue space has been seen as more of a liberal thing. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of conservative leaning folks who are kind of suspicious of dialogue groups because they fear that it might just be sort of a front for pushing a liberal agenda. And I think that it's interesting because when people feel outnumbered, they are much less willing to engage. And we work a lot in family therapy. That's sort of like the basis for our initial approach, and couples therapy in particular. And so there's a lot of, trends that you see in interpersonal relationships, particularly between married couples or family members, where people are actually sort of mirroring each other in a way where sort of the dynamics can be scrambled. So that's just something, that I'm hearing from you, and also something that we're focused on in Braver Angels. And that's why we're sort of trying to go to people, where they are. Yeah. But I definitely take the point that right now, the very notion of debate itself is in question. Yes. I think the vast majority of people will, say they're against cancel culture. But then when it comes to ideas they don't like, they're not actually that willing to engage them. Exactly. So is that something you've seen over the past few years, the Trump era, the polarization, that like the culture war has begun to just sort of infect these discussions that are actually about deeper issues that aren't really partisan at all?
I don't know. The only way I can think to answer that is that it has gotten deeper, and as a result, there are speakers that we've had in the past that we don't feel like we can have anymore. Because they've gotten into that realm of their own version of cancel. They'll talk, like, it's so brilliant what you're saying, because it is true. People will talk all day long about how horrible cancel culture is, and then they will say, "Oh, we can't have kneeling at a football stadium because that's anti-American. So let's just end that. We cannot have that." Well, that's cancel culture. If you say that AOC should not be able to say anything because you disagree, that's cancel culture. And it works on the other side. If you say Donald Trump can't say anything because it's so horrendous what he might say, and what if people thought, that's cancel culture. And it is across the board, and we are seeing it in both sides. It's just, what are they canceling? They cancel. Right. And what power do they have to impact? I mean, obviously, certain media groups can have a lot more power to shut down certain voices than those voices might have in their own little networks if they don't own a media. So that's been the biggest challenge, is that we found that people have gone down that rabbit hole, and we find that they're not able anymore to have a fair discourse. And so as a result, we just feel like, we can't have those speakers anymore. And it's a shame, because in other areas they have great things to offer, and it'd be great to have a conversation with them. But totally, if they're advocating for, everyone to be shut down because they don't agree, it's not right. It just doesn't. Well, and so it seems like Freedom Fest, it's not just a conference or sort of an end itself. It's sort of a larger movement, and the conference is sort of a key gathering, and probably ideally for you guys also like an entree into the movement for new folks. How do you sort of see this larger liberty movement in terms of its role in politics, but also in culture? How can libertarians both advance their ideological goals, but also play a positive role in their community and culture, in sort of living up to those values of viewpoint diversity
and respect and civility when so much of the pressure in politics is to go the other way, where so many times that's sort of seen as a weakness. So that would be my first question. And then maybe after that, because I like to give you the hard questions, we can talk about the influence of Donald Trump on the right and the Republican Party and on libertarianism, because regardless of what you think of Donald Trump's politics or the policies and the way he governed as president, it's hard to argue against the fact that he's very divisive and oftentimes intentionally so. So I guess, my first question is, how do you see the larger movement, sort of the promise and the perils? And then specifically, how do you see that unfolding in the context of, Donald Trump, what he's been saying about the 2020 election, the fact that people are living in just completely different realities? Sort of a tangled question, but I think you see what I'm getting at. But so maybe we can open that.
A tangled world. What can I say? That's the problem. It's not, easy. And that's the thing. We so often want to just say it's this. And I know my mind, I'm always searching for the answer. And one of my reminders, I have like little affirmations that come up, is like, there may not be an answer. It's about what you're experiencing now and what can you put forward into the world. It has nothing to do with the answer. And I think that's one of the things that we're always looking for, the answer. In terms of libertarianism, there's a huge opportunity for both the libertarians as a party, but also libertarianism as a philosophy to move forward here as a solution point. Because no matter this is my experience. I'm not a libertarian purist. I believe in that there are many different points of view. And as long as we're coming together around this concept of greater individual choice, accountability, and individuality, less government involvement, how we get there, specifics, we can work that out. But let's come together around this concept. Not everyone's with me on that. We do have the problem of the purist, which they wouldn't call that a problem. They call it the problem of the impurist.
Right.
So there's that little dynamic within the libertarian world that we have to work out. And I hope that we will, because I think what we have to offer is super important and extremely life affirming. That we, across the board, libertarians are highly optimistic about the human individual. And I like that. I also like that we apply our principles very uniformly, even when it's not necessarily convenient. And that's one of the things that I find, like with this cancel culture flipping, I'll be upset about your cancel culture as long as I can still have my cancel culture. So I want to be comfortable with my world. And, if we believe in victimless crimes, we believe in not making victimless crimes illegal. That's something that the Libertarian Party says. So if I take drugs in my home and I don't impact anyone else, I should be allowed to take drugs, including heroin, including meth, including whatever. And until I create a victim, that is my choice, my body, my life, my world. This includes driving drunk. That driving drunk would not necessarily be against the law until there's a problem. Now, does this create a riskier world? You could say so. Although I think ultimately people would start taking more responsibility instead of deferring responsibility. The state has to take care of me and tell me what to do and tell me how to act. Perhaps I would start taking more responsibility. But see, that's scary for people. They're like, no, we can't have that. And I understand that. I totally get that. So working together to make sure we're maximizing people's rights and opportunities to choose and their own accountability in a way that also doesn't impact other people. So in this whole Corona situation, I've been contemplating this concept of, because you had the mask wearing, right? Anti-mask, pro-mask, how dare you wear a mask? How dare you not wear a mask? I mean, talk about division. We have been divided over the mask. And my thinking is, well, if you apply the non-aggression principle, which is another libertarian principle, I think you get to the right solution. And we have to have a session about this where I'm asking some prominent libertarians. It's called Just Slap It With Some Nap is the non-aggression principle the answer to everything? And here's my suggestion. So if you force me to wear a mask, that is an act of aggression that we should not have. So we should not force people to have masks. However, if there's a disease out there and I might have the disease and pass it on to someone, you could argue that that would be a form of aggression if I'm passing on my carrying of the disease to someone else. So if I'm being responsible in the non-aggression principle, you're not going to tell me to wear a mask, but I will choose to wear one in order to not aggress against the other person. So we don't need the laws and the mandates, but we have people acting responsibly and ethically. And one of the things that I think we need to preach more than ever is personal ethics of being honest, being respectful, honoring the rights of others, and making decisions that are morally just. I think most of the problems of the world is because there's an individual out there making an immoral decision. And regardless of what the law is, they're still, they make the immoral decision against the law, or just even if there's not a law, they're making a decision that hurts another person. They treat their employees inappropriately. They bilk the system. They don't pay their debts, whatever, that has this cascading effect. Those are poor, personally ethical decisions that have negative impacts in our society. So teaching more personal ethics, I think, would be a huge advantage to our society. And one of the ways that I think we do that with the libertarian viewpoint is to go local. Instead of having these big national conversations with the big talking heads of national media, we need to be dog walkers, city councilmen, county councilwomen. We need to run for state legislate. We need to get local so that we can really talk to each other at a more personal level. Having these big, parties and all this big nationalism doesn't get us very far. So I think the libertarian solution is in going local and engaging each other with the Board of Education, for example. Now, when it comes to Donald Trump, oh Lord, this guy, bear in mind, we had him at our conference, but it was when he had just done Celebrity Apprentice. We never thought he was gonna, we're like, what did we do? So, it was an interesting, even at that time, should we have him come to Freedom Fest? And there's some people at our conference who love that we had Donald Trump come to Freedom Fest and they want him back. And there are other people who are like, how could you have Donald Trump at Freedom Fest? And I'll never come again if you have him back. So he's a tricky character. But I think you were right on the money. The problem I had with him is that he was calling out some BS that's been happening in our world, in the media, in the partisanship in Washington, in the swamp situation. And many Trump supporters will tell you they were excited because they felt like he was calling it out. Problem is, he also did it in this incredibly divisive, demeaning, calling people names kind of way. So he was not able, and I just don't think it's in his personality, to rise above that. And that's one of the things I love about your moniker, Braver Angels, because there is a certain amount of rise aboveness that we all need in order to help improve society. And the glorious thing to me is that every single one of your members, every single one of our Freedom Fest attendees, and I think so many people in this country want the betterment of our society. And like a marriage, which I love that analogy too, if we keep considering so many of our fellow citizens, our fellow country people, as the enemy, as soon as, in a marriage, and you can attest to this if this is part of your practice, as soon as you start calling your partner the enemy and you're vilifying them and you're calling them names, is there a relationship there?
Right.
There's not. And that's what we're doing in our society right now. We vilify our countrymen.
And the other point here is that we can't really get a divorce as a country.
We better work this out.
Divorce. I mean, divorce is always an option for couples. And I think, in certain instances, divorce actually makes sense, right? Both parties are better off. But that's not really an option when it comes to,
people talk about it. Let's just, California secede and Texas secede. And I think there's that much stress. And the libertarians have always been very live and let live. If you want to have socialist point of view, great. We don't like just, the problem is that I think there are a lot of other philosophies and principles where I feel like I need you to do that too. So if I'm socialist and I want to live in a socialist world, I need you to live in a socialist world too. And if you don't want to, too bad, too sad, it's what I think is right. And that's where, you know, so if you want to live in a socialist world, can you find the other socialists who want to live in a socialist world, but leave us libertarians out of it, you know, kind of thing. And likewise, I think people who are anti-socialist and say you can't have that, I'm not necessarily sure that that's the correct thing either, at least from a libertarian point of view. I just don't want to be told how to live. I get told how to live all the time. It's exhausting.
Right. Another question that occurs to me is, you know, one thing that's been in the news a lot and is such a key flashpoint between people who have different views is sort of the nature of democracy itself. And obviously this is kind of manifesting in a lot of ways, most notably right now, sort of the debate, the fierce debate about voting laws. And some people talk about voter fraud. Other people are talking about voter suppression. Yep. And I wonder how libertarians think about this issue, given that it's government who is controlling the procedures and regulations of voting. So are you guys going to be exploring that specific topic at the festival? That's something we've been talking a lot about at Braver Angels, and really cuts to the core of why this is so raw for people, because both sides are essentially accusing the other of being anti-democratic.
Yes.
And merits aside, I mean, I and everyone else have their own opinions about you know, what is true and what is not true. And I do think there is, you know, objective reality. But again, the point remains that the two sides are sort of mirroring each other. And when you get to that point of saying, you know, you are actively trying to, you know, strip me of my ability to have a voice, that's when you start seeing the rhetoric get more violent.
Yes.
That's when you start seeing people begin to justify or at least tolerate or excuse violence in the name of political objective. So I wonder how libertarians are thinking about this specific aspect, and if you hope that Freedom Fest can be a way that people can sort of rise above that issue to sort of keep in mind that we all are Americans and we all do need a voice in the political process.
That's a really wonderful insight and question, and I appreciate that very much. And I think you're dead on that this is really at the heart of where we've come to we're coming all the way down to the vote, and the heart of how important we feel that is, because it's the individual's voice, which just goes to show how much that individuality, the free choice of the individual, is at the heart of our nation and our culture, because everyone does value it so much, and we don't want it corrupted in either direction. We don't want it corrupted by being defrauded, and we don't want it corrupted by being suppressed. The problem we have, and this is where libertarians would sidestep this argument a little bit to, I think, the root cause. So for a libertarian, the problem is that government has grown too big and the stakes are too high, which is why you have the problem of fraud and suppression, because you have people for whom they need and want that power. Government now impacts every single aspect of our lives, to the point that I have to cover my face because the government said, not because I choose to be healthy and to protect my fellow man, but because the government now says I have to wear something on my face. So that's how far we've gotten in the power of government. So why are there so many lobbying issues? Why is there corruption? Because there is so much concentrated power in government. Government is supposed to be small and local in a libertarian view. And when you do that, you know your voter, the person who's voting, because you're voting about local small issues. It's not these tens of thousands voting at the national level where all this suppression and there's not so much at stake. So libertarians would argue this is the exact reason to keep government small and local, because you're going to remove that power struggle. And that's really what's going on. That's why you have election fraud and election suppression, because people are trying to get power. And the government has allowed this small group of electeds to have so much power over our lives. So the stakes are huge. So that would be the libertarian response. If you reduce the size of government, you reduce the impact of that. Once that happens, I think libertarians are very interested in ranked choice voting. We will have a session on that, and Rank the Vote organization is coming. And that opens up some really interesting ideas, because you no longer have the concept of the wasted vote, because now you can vote in ranked order and those votes can still count. So you don't have to think, I'd like to vote for Joe Jorgensen, but oh my gosh, what if Trump wins? Or, oh, I'd like to vote for Joe Jorgensen, but oh my gosh, what if Joe Biden? And again, right. Stakes are so high. So now you can vote for Joe Jorgensen and your second choice and your third choice, or your none of the above, which is very popular among libertarians as well. Your nota is very key. But ranked choice voting, once we get to the dissembling of all this incredible power we have continually imbued, and then that's why, so the more you see money in politics, it's because there's power in politics, and we keep giving our government more power over our lives to tell us how to live. And so then there's more at stake, and the people who want the power are going to invest more, whether it's a corporation or a lobby or an issue or an actual politician. They're going to, it attracts a different, objective, I think, than the original intent. So that would be my answer. It's not really about fraud or suppression. It's about power.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I like what you said about the notion of individualism sort of running bone deep in American culture. And I think that's one reason why the voting issue has become so raw. I think a lot of people on the progressive side would argue that there's sort of a danger between like a false equivalence that people make. Will say, well, there's voter fraud and then there's voter suppression, and would argue that all of the recent pushes by state legislature to limit early vote and put in place new regulations are kind of like a solution in search of a problem, when there hasn't really been any widespread voter fraud that would affect the margins of an election the way that Trump has been saying since the election. And I wonder too, that's why it'd be so cool if there more progressives could participate in these conversations. And I totally understand that. I think there's a pretty powerful strain right now on the left, particularly the activist left, of not wanting to even participate in debate because they feel like this is going to legitimize points of view that they believe are harmful. But I think there's such an interesting discussion to be had about the ways in which the individual interacts with systems, because our society has become so large and complex. And as you mentioned, the decisions of a relatively small number of leaders have such massive impacts on the lives of individuals. And at the same time, there's sort of these legacies of systems that perpetuate their consequences over time and even over generations. Yes. And so sometimes, what seems like an individual issue in terms of a disparity, between a racial group, they're sort of both at play, right? Everyone has individual agency in terms of the decisions they make about their behavior or their priorities or their values. But at the same time, humans are products of their environment and products of these sort of systems and legacies that play out. And so it's interesting to sort of be able to consider both perspectives, because I think there are these sort of higher ideals that unite Americans. And if we can figure out a way to understand that in the vast majority of people, one of the reasons they're so activated is because they do believe in democracy, and they believe that they are the ones fighting to protect democracy. And so ironically, the reason that people are so agitated is because they're seeking to protect democracy. And I like what you said about libertarians sort of have this like reflexive suspicion of power. And I think there's a lot of that on the left too, in terms of elites, be they in politics or business, have sort of an interest in keeping people divided and keeping people sort of having these debates, because ultimately it means that they can maintain power and consolidate power. And progressives would argue that, well, a lot of times the only body that can really stand up to entrenched corporate power is the government, you know, in terms of like antitrust legislation, or reforming big tech, for example, would most likely require a fairly aggressive move by the federal government to break up big tech. And so that'll be an interesting discussion too, right? Like if libertarians believe that like these big social media players have too much power, who is empowered to shift that balance of power and sort of redistribute it if not the government?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, overall, most free market economists do not believe that they believe monopolies will fall naturally. They don't need the government to necessarily break them up. So when it comes to if the government is the one that has the power to constrict, break up, that means that who is now, okay, so if you have the ability to come to me and dictate my life, tell me what job I'm going to have, tell me how much money I have to, where I have to spend my money, and I have to get my permission from you, or else you're going to do that, I'm going to start lobbying you because you actually have the power over me. So the fact that the government comes in and is going to tell businesses you're too big or you're doing the wrong thing inherently creates the corporate money culture that we see in politics today. It is because government can tell businesses what to do that creates the money funnel. I better support this candidate because he or she is going to be able to break up my company later. So let me support that campaign. Let me give money to, that's why Donald Trump has given money to multiple sides and multiple people, because they all have the power to break up his company. And across the board, this is true. Why do you think that Zuckerberg keeps showing up in front of Congress? Because they have the power. And why is he saying, oh, I've got these policies in place, don't break me up? Because exactly because they have the power to do so. So the reason that we're having all of these censorship issues, the reason that we're having all of this money in politics issue, the reason we're having all this corruption in politics issue is because these electeds have the ability to come in and say, I will break up your company if you do not do what I think you should do. So now I have to start kowtowing to you. And we get this not true capitalism, but the corporate cronyism in bed with government, because government says, you do what I tell you or I will mess you up. So what are you going to do? You have to kowtow now to that. So you're not truly independent and you're not making decisions based on your own self-interest. You're trying to prevent the government from coming in and doing what they have the power to do.
Interesting. Well, I feel like I could talk about politics with you all day. But I think we should wrap up soon. And so I guess my final question to you would be, what attracts you to the work of Braver Angels? Why did you guys invite us to come and how do you hope that we can work together in the future?
Yeah, because I feel like our concept is so aligned that this partisanship is not helping our nation. It's not helping our children. It's not helping our future. It is destructive. And unless we start respecting each other and saying, you said something earlier about progressives not wanting to engage because they don't want to give that validity. I'm going to be honest, I think that's a mistake. I mean, there are truly fringe, extreme people that we don't need to deal with. But conservatives and liberals need to start talking to each other and respecting each other and quit this. Find out why. Why do conservatives feel the way that they do? Why do progressives feel the way that they do? And respect that, and then work together to figure out, okay, we can agree on this is an issue. Race is an issue, okay? But there are a lot of people who don't think there is. Why don't they think it is? There are a lot of people of color who say, forget this racism. I'm over it. I'm sick of it. And we name call them. We say that they're Uncle Toms and they're this, and we put them down. And then we have other people who say there isn't a race problem, and they're not seeing that there is a race problem. So these issues need to be talked about. And when we say to somebody else, your opinion doesn't matter, you don't have legitimacy, I can't even bother to talk to you or understand your perspective, we cannot make progress. And so that's what I really respect about Braver Angels, is that it feels like you're trying to bring people together to have those conversations so that we can actually make progress. And there's progress to be made. We need to be there for our children. There are minority groups in this country who have not had a fair shake and have not been able to participate in the beauty of what this country is supposed to offer. We do not have enough economic opportunity. We're not taking care of ourselves in our healthcare system. But that doesn't mean that you have the right solution or I have the right solution. We need to come together and learn each other's values so that we can honor each other as a whole country, rather than saying, my view is the only view or your view is the only view. It all has validity. Nobody has all the answers. Sorry, I don't even have all the answers. Somebody can come here and tell me right now, but what about this? And I'll say, you're right, I never thought about that. And that's the beauty of progress. And I think that's the beauty of Freedom Fest and Braver Angels.
Well, I think that's beautifully said and a good note to end on. Valerie, I really enjoyed having you on the podcast. I would encourage all of our listeners, go to freedomfest.com, check out what's coming up. I presume there's a way for people who are not going to be able to attend in person to still engage, right? To some extent.
I'm literally announcing after this podcast, I need to put out an email blast. We have just had a partner step in to offer a live stream of all of our main stage content with behind the scenes interviews with some of the speakers coming off stage. It's our first time really doing a live stream like this. So we're about to put that on the website and announce that out. So, join our email list when you get to the website. And literally later today, we're going to have that announcement up there. So it'll be great for people to join in, see the main stage content, get a little bit of a feel of what Freedom Fest is all about. And I would love for more of the people engaged with Braver Angels, all parts of the spectrum, to come to Freedom Fest, learn from what we have to offer, and we want to learn what you have to offer. And we want to find that honoring of each other's values so that we can move forward in this country. Well,
I'm excited for you to meet our volunteers and vice versa. And that's great to hear about the live streaming, because that just means so many more people will get to experience what's going on. So Valerie, thank you. Thank you to our listeners who made it this far. Please subscribe. No, it was excellent. I mean, these are exactly the kinds of conversations that we want to have on the podcast, where we, dive deep, where we challenge each other, where we, sort of think about new frames. And I really like what you said about rising above to be both brave and angelic. So with that, I will say to all of our listeners, thank you for listening, and see you next time.